Okay, so this is more of a chill day video because it's the weekend, why not? And today I'm gonna actually do a channel Q&A. I posted one on my community post a little bit ago after having the Sony FX6, which I unfortunately had to give back, but a lot of you guys had questions and I seemingly have some answers. This is definitely one of those videos where you throw on your headphones, enjoy the show, and you know, we'll get there. Now, the first question is, what are my favorite 4x5 filters? Now, this actually comes from the owner of Element Filters, but I did get a chance to use the Opalines on a couple of different projects. Now, I've only used the Opalines so far, as the camera I was using did have built-in NDs, but they're actually quite good. I'm a big fan of my diffusion filters to soften up a look. We actually use them as well as shooting a concert too, because we did have some sharper lenses. We like the autofocus, but we want to take off some of that edge. Now, I'm going to save on a little bit of time for this question, but essentially it's, do I think they can improve on some PL VND filters that can go on the front of your camera? Now, Poco by Mofage actually does have a really decent VND that goes on the front. It also is an adapter as well, so you can adapt your lens mount, if it's an E mount or an L mount or something else, into something else like PL or EF, at least to my knowledge. I've only really used the PL one. However, do I think it can be improved? I think for the most part, some of those adapters don't necessarily account for every single distance in terms of the lens you might use. For example, we tried using Mofage Poco on the GH7 on set, and it didn't quite work with the Atlas Mercuries because the flange distance on the Mercuries were a little bit too long. I guess if there was one improvement is actually expanding how big those adapters are. I know they're meant to be a little bit on the smaller side, but that way it might be able to accommodate for more lenses. Also, sometimes I want a same mount to same mount VND. For example, if I'm someone with a Sony FX3, which doesn't have built-in NDs, but I don't want to have to adapt to something else, an E to E mount would work really well. Now, this question is actually asking about lighting, especially getting that glassy, oily look out of your skin. Now, this is particularly harder if you're working with darker skinned individuals. It can get quite annoying, but I actually left the video right over here on exposing and lighting for darker skin tones. Now, in terms of this setup right now, I'm on this kit called Anything But a Softbox, and I've been using a 5-in-1 reflector on Amazon and shining my Nanlite 60B off the wall, letting the return come off, but then fusing it on one end, which kind of gives it a more softer look and doesn't create harsh highlights. Something that if you're using a softbox solution might actually end up happening. But if you guys want to see a video on how to expose and light for darker skin tones to get that glossy look out, I'll leave a link either over here or down in the description. What's the biggest difference you see between the Red and the FX6 that's not RAW compatibility? This one's actually pretty easy, and you could tell kind of by looking at the cameras. Now, the Red Komodo X and just other box cameras are meant to have a lot of things attached to it, which also could add up in price. The Sony FX6 being a more ENG style camera, great for corporate, great for documentaries, a lot of the things already come inside of the box. Now, if you have the budget to afford those things to style out a boxed up camera, then you can go ahead and you can do that. I think most people like the Red system want that 16-bit RAW and they're willing to deal with that price tag. However, a big difference you might see is going to be in the body design. And a lot of the I/O is already built into the Sony FX6, where on the Red Komodo X, you have to buy other accessories in order to do that. Advice on transitioning from weddings into corporate/commercial video. I think the easy way to do this is to just shoot spec projects. If you're making a lot in terms of the wedding scene, maybe save a little bit of money and actually have your own projects. And that's what I'm doing a lot of the time. A lot of the money you're seeing from some of these brand deals or integrations or dedicated videos kind of go right back into the project. That way, not only do I have great content to actually share and make the partnership even better, but at the same time, I can compile all of that footage if I want to make a new reel as a cinematographer. So one of the things you might have to do is put a little bit more into your own wallet in terms of making these projects happen, and that way you could actually dress for the job that you want to get hired for. Okay, so this one has 4 questions. I'm going to try to rapid fire them. There's a couple people that ask multiple things, but how do you handle the business side? I have a business degree, get great accountants, and make sure that you're organized. I'm also not organized, so I have to pay people to help me get better organized. How do I market myself? I've used Instagram almost exclusively, but for the most part, it's word of mouth. If I do a good job for someone who has a network, they'll just tell the other person about what I can do, and then that ends up being the next thing that I work on. How to use live spec work for your business? Use spec work for your business by saving it up either in a portfolio or sending a video that's like a brand you want to work for and then just sending it to them and their competitors instead. That way they can see what you're capable of and you actually might get a call back. But it actually takes a lot of the outreach to do that. But what's great about that is that there's an unlimited amount of emails you can send. And obviously any leads on when you will have the pics as shipping. I don't know when you guys are gonna get it, but from the time of this video, it's probably in the next week and a half to 2 weeks. But I think you guys are gonna get it a little bit later. I'm not too sure actually. No one really has the Pixis, to be honest with you. I'm still seeing a lot of debate around full frame versus crop sensor. I think it's really stupid. There's plenty of good movies. Essentially, does full frame really matter on top of crop sensor, and is it actually even necessary? Short answer is going to be no. I think it's more of a personal preference thing. If a look of a full frame sensor is something that you really like, then yeah, it's going to matter quite a bit. And if it's something where it doesn't bother you too much, you want to spend less money on all the other things that come with full frame, then don't use full frame. You could use Super 35. There's a ton of movies, and even today, that still use Super 35 sensors. I think what ended up happening a couple of years ago, like in 2018-19, is that some of the full frame cameras got the bulk of the R&D and the technology, where APS-C cameras were kind of left behind in terms of what they actually put into the camera. Nowadays, a lot of the same things in APS-C cameras are in the same thing as full frame as well, making the only difference being the sensor size. So there might be some confusion in terms of full frame better than APS-C. I just think that maybe the full frame cameras outside of its sensor were just made better than APS-C, but that's not the case in 2024. This one's great. What features do you need in a camera if buying the camera means you are changing systems, such as moving from Sony to Lumix? I think that's going to depend on what I need it for. Now, I've made videos about switching before, but I feel like at this point in my career, in terms of YouTube and just being a freelancer every now and again, I don't really switch cameras. I more collect rather than choose. Now, there's certain cameras I have in my house for certain things. Right now, I'm still using the Panasonic S9. Chill out. And I do use my Sony cameras for more professional work when I'm working with retainer clients or when I'm working on personal projects and I don't want to rent out a Red. Now, I'm also going to use the Blackmagic Pixis for certain things as well, mostly going to be locked off or very light handheld, but every single camera brand kind of has things it's really good at and things it's not so good at. But those things aren't going to make a difference if your use case doesn't actually coincide with them. So even though you're going to see a ton of videos on new cameras coming out, the forefront of your decision making should always be what your use case is, and not just because your favorite creator said so. Ooh, this one is not necessarily camera related, but what is your story behind transitioning from sports to film? There's actually a weird gap between when I stopped playing college football and when I picked up a camera and started to make content. I graduated with a finance degree. I actually quit playing football before my senior year over an injury, and I started working in the bank and did a normal life thing, and then I tried to compete in natural bodybuilding, found out that there's not a lot of money in it and it does take a lot of work, and then I got a camera because I thought I'd be a fitness influencer. That didn't happen, and then I used that camera and the fact that I'm already broke, and I started doing photo shoots. Now we're here. But in terms of my formal schooling, I have a finance degree. I have no idea how I got here. Do connections with people help you get to where you are now? Absolutely. I would say like 95% of the things that I've done or I'm able to do is based on connections. However, that doesn't necessarily mean that you get to take a play off in terms of actually perfecting your own skill. I find that a lot of the connections that I did get was because I was somewhat good at something. When I got signed to Creator, where Armando told me about Creator in general, I only had 2,000 subscribers, and it was over 2 years ago. At the time, I was still really grinding and putting in the work on YouTube and creating content and bettering myself as a filmmaker. And just because you don't have a gigantic following doesn't mean other people don't notice. In fact, there might be some new creators that are actually really small accounts, but they do put in that work and they do try their best. So yes, you will get a lot of things from the connections you have, but you also have to make sure that those connections know you to actually be skillful in what you're doing and not just some guy that knows a bunch of people. Okay, we have another rapid fire one. I'll put all the questions up here while I'm answering these guys. So, do I only work as a freelancer? No, I actually don't freelance as often as I used to, mostly because my freelancing is working on brand partnerships and putting it back in the product to make things look cool. Do you work on longer or multiple projects with the same team or company? Yes, I do have one retainer client, another one coming up. I do work with a supplement company doing their Google ads for them in terms of filming it. And I do have another client that I just found out is going to come down the pipeline. Most of the time with my crew, if I'm local, I'll work with the same people, more or less. How often did you make films for yourself, like filming a holiday or another trip? I like working on projects with other directors and being collaborative, but in terms of like filming holiday trips and stuff, I kind of just keep that footage for myself. If you guys haven't noticed, I did take my FX3 to West Africa, but I haven't posted any of that footage, mostly because I kind of want to keep it for myself. Not everything needs to be on the internet. When you cooperate with people, how do they find you? And do they know you personally, or is there an agency? For one, I do work with an agency, shout out to Creator Crew, but it is kind of a hybrid talent agency, not necessarily a freelance one, so they're not giving me any jobs as a cinematographer unless we're all working together on a creator film. But in terms of collaborators, honestly, it goes right back into that thing I was talking about before. I just worked really hard at my craft, I shared it a bunch, and then you start to get aligned with other people that think the same way. How many cameras and lenses do you own? This is gonna be hilarious. I technically only own one camera and 2 lenses. The only camera that I have with my own money that I don't have on a long-term loaner is my Sony a7C II, a 16-35 f4, and my 40mm f2.5. Everything else is kind of on borrowed time. The S5 IIX, my Lumix S9, I just took back the FX6, and I do have an FX3 that's still on loan because I'm indecisive. I haven't bought one yet. So I just borrow one whenever I can. Some of the part of this YouTube thing is you get the ability to rent from pretty much anything and anyone, so I've been doing that for a while. Now this one actually has 10 questions, so I'm gonna try to answer all these as quickly as possible, but this is for a new videographer who's really curious about a couple of things. One is about my first paying gig, did I have a website, how much did I charge, and how all of that worked between how I actually got found. Now, the first gig that I ever did was $150. I did a fitness video for someone that was competing soon, and that was actually because I already had an existing network. Going back to that sports question, when I did compete a little while ago, I had a lot of contacts that were in that industry, which made a lot of sense because at the time, Instagram just got video, so everybody wanted it, was in demand. In terms of having a website, I barely have a website now. It's up there, it works, it just hasn't been updated in a few years. So I do have one, but very seldom do I get reached out because of it. Most of the things I get reached out to is word of mouth. Now, that's not necessarily to say don't have a website. It is important to do that just so you always have a landing page of some sort, but for the most part, I kind of word of mouth most of my way through freelance life. As a new videographer, everyone seems to be focusing on gear and this and getting that. What are the real skills that you need to do to be successful in the field or industry? I still think you need to be aware of gear that it exists. I don't think you need to buy everything, but I do think you need to know what things are and how you actually are able to use them. Oftentimes, as you grow more and more, you start to have a little bit less on your personal kit and you rent out things quite a bit. So knowing how those things work without having to figure it out on the day because you are on borrowed time, quite literally, are things that you still need to keep in mind. Now, in terms of being successful on set, as long as for the most part you have a great attitude and you're willing to learn, I think you're gonna do quite fine. I do think that the filmmaking business is the relationship business, and the better relationships you have with different people, the higher up you're going to go. Now, part of having a good attitude about things is being able to not know stuff, learn stuff, and then apply it quickly. If you're someone who doesn't take coaching very well or someone who doesn't necessarily take constructive criticism, then it's gonna be really hard for you to progress. But if you're someone who likes to learn things, likes to work with other people, and at the same time you could swallow your pride when things don't go your way, well, then you're gonna do pretty well. What about some of the hard truths that nobody's talking about in the field, i.e. dry spells in the industry where business is good and then cold? How do you go about setting plans and gigs with multiple clients that fall through? Are there clientele you generally avoid, and what are some of the pitfalls of the industry? Now, I don't feel like this is something nobody's talking about. I do feel like it's something that just gets overlooked or not searched for as much, but there is going to be times where things are going to be quick and things are going to be slow, and you have to prepare for that. Generally speaking, during the winter months, it's not going to be as busy for the most amount of people. But during the summer, it's going to be incredibly busy and you might not have a social life. Now, a lot of people are going to tell you in the industry as they progress that it ends up becoming your whole life. So finding some sort of work-life balance, as much as it might not be able to gear towards work-life balance, is going to help out a lot. Now, ways that I set myself up to make sure that I don't go completely broke is to set up retainer clients. Now, this might take a little bit of time, but basically, as you start working with either similar clients or the same one over and over again, you can set up an arrangement where you just work with them regularly throughout the year. For the most part, most businesses need video or some sort of content all year round, so setting up a retainer deal is an excellent way to do that, and it doesn't take too much time because you're not learning a new client, and at the same time, generally there's going to be a price break, so they save a little bit of money on something they were buying anyways. And what are some of the pitfalls of the industry is the fact that a lot of things aren't in your control. If you haven't been paying attention, there's been strikes all over the place. The industry feels a little bit slow for a lot of different people, and teams are getting smaller, budgets are getting smaller, things are getting made cheaper. So a lot of people that are used to a type of workflow are probably having a little bit of a struggle now. And truthfully, the way that I kind of mitigate that is, well, make content on YouTube. It takes a lot of work, but over time you have a little bit more of a security blanket, because if work gets kind of slow, well, I can make more content and help you guys out, but at the same time, in different ways, I still get paid for it. What should new videographer, content creator focus on most of all? I.e. trying to get new clients, focus on the craft or skill, knowing the right gear. If all three, what would you start with first? I honestly would start with all three. I would make them different days to do them, but I would have all three. Because if you're missing one of those three, then something's not going to go right. If you know how to get clients and you know how your craft is going to go, but you don't have any equipment to make it happen, well, then you're going to be missing something. If you have all the gear, you know how to use it, but you don't have any clients, well, then you're going to be missing something. And if you have all the clients and you have all the craft, well, you already know we went in circles now. But one of the things I want to head home is that there isn't one tip in terms of being a content creator or filmmaker. The whole thing is going to be and yes instead of and but or the first one. Generally speaking, there's going to be a bunch of different skills involved, and it makes the most amount of sense to try to chip away at each one at a time and not necessarily try to put all your eggs in one basket, because it overall is going to hurt you in the long run. Hurt? I don't know what the hell I said, but you know what I mean. What would you recommend and advise if you wanted to get into this field eventually full time? Do lots of it, make the right connections, work insanely hard, which sounds intimidating, but it is necessary in terms of being able to do this full time, because this is kind of a 1% job. But generally speaking, just keep on working realistically. If you were starting fresh and new in this brand new current situation, where would you start to market yourself? YouTube, Instagram, or TikTok? Depends on where you want your clients to come from. If you want to have your clients come from YouTube to make YouTube content, probably YouTube. If you want it to be on Instagram, probably Instagram. TikTok, probably TikTok. Wherever you show up or whatever you make is probably what you're gonna get hired for. No one's really gonna ask me to shoot a wedding if all I'm gonna be showing you is commercials. Now, sometimes they usually happen and it's usually friends. However, whatever you decide to put yourself onto is exactly what you're intending to get hired for. So keep that in mind. Do you have words of advice when it comes to bettering your skills craft rather than focusing on those that seem to have better skills and crafts than your own? Example, you see other people's amazing work on Instagram, Facebook, or X, and whatever you feel your work is nowhere near that person's level of skill. I think this comes from playing sports. And I think what ends up happening is that when you've played sports for a long time, especially as you get higher and higher levels, you generally accept that people are going to have more skill than you, more time in the game, and a little bit more reps. Now, I think in the creative space, you should look to some of those people as inspiration for your own craft. I pull things from creators I admire all the time, and using some of those techniques to make myself better eventually helps me land into my own style. Now, I would recommend that a lot of people do the same thing. There might be some issues, and honestly, if it does bother you a lot, maybe don't consume social media like that. Maybe the best remedy is to just distance yourself from it. Now, I know that might not be the greatest thing to hear in the world, but if something is making you feel bad, just move away from it and focus on the things that you have. However, based on my background, I haven't really felt bad seeing somebody that has better work. I do just kind of look at it as a way of motivation and a jump off point to make myself better in the long run. You never really know what people's resources are or what their capacity is into making the work that they do, and acknowledging that just means that I can just do my own thing. That was quoted from Miles Morales, but you get the picture. Okay, last 3 questions. This person asked quite a lot of stuff. In your eyes, what is the proper way to plan out projects for clients that have led you to do success and have let you be the videographer in control of the shoot and the project? I think the easiest way to do this is if you have everything laid out from your shot list, your concept, and everything you want to do, the more initiative that you take in terms of actually planning that shoot, the more that client's probably going to look at it, realize they don't want to do all of that work, and they're probably going to let you do your thing. I think one of the things that we miss a little bit about creative control sometimes is sometimes we have an idea, but we have it written down in a notepad or an email. I like to use Milanote quite a bit, and I will send those to clients so we have an idea of everything that's going on. And when it looks official, quote unquote, or when it looks a little bit more planned out, it actually helps that client be like, you know what? I'm not going to go through all of that. They already did the trouble, so I'm going to let them do their thing. How do you know where to look, scout for cinematic locations for projects in the city or town you live in, as well as rental spaces? So I use Peerspace and Gigster in terms of finding rental spaces, and I just put it to my city or a city that's close to mine, and I start looking through locations based on the project. In terms of finding places in your city, you gotta do a lot of walking. Generally speaking, I used to wake up at 5 o'clock in the morning during the pandemic, and I would spend time walking between 5 and 8 almost every single day to find new locations in order to shoot. The hard part is that the bigger the city you live in, the harder it is to film, run, and gun. You do need to get permits. However, it's a great way to just take a day and walk around your city, especially those times when the sun's a little bit lower, and you might come up with some new ideas. And for the very last question, it's going to be, was there a time where you filmed a big project and things just went wrong, and how'd you overcome it? Actually, not a big project, but I've had a bunch of small ones where stuff's gone wrong, and it was kind of interesting. Now, this is when I very first started. I shot a video for pretty cheap. Client wanted me to change a song a bajillion times, and over time, I just realized we couldn't come to a resolution, so I offered to give the money back. But also at the same time, there was an agreement that you couldn't use the video that I made, the song that you didn't like. So what ended up happening is they wanted to use the video, they suddenly changed their mind about the song, and that's kind of the whole story. Generally speaking, I'm a pretty paranoid person because I have had cards fail, but I did have them backed up, so I try to make sure that that never ends up happening. Now, I have had gear break on set in my very early days. I had a lens breakdown, and the way I overcame it was I live in the city of Toronto, so I could always just go to a rental shop because there's a lot of them, and I had to lose a little bit of money and do that instead. That being said, that is a whole channel Q&A. I want to change the pace a little bit. I haven't done a video like this for a while, and oftentimes people ask questions a little bit more about myself and how this whole thing in my head works, and I don't actually end up making videos for that. So I hope you guys enjoyed the video. I hope this was good listening. If the audio's trash, you'll let me know probably. And YouTube also wants you to watch another video, or at least I want YouTube to want you to watch another video, which I'm probably gonna leave over here if you haven't already turned this off. I'll see you guys in the next one. Peace.